And we're back on another exciting episode of Starfleet So Hail, where we have a casual and informal conversation about Star Trek. Today, I'm pleased to be joined once again by my good friend Robbie, Earl Grey Trekkie, as he's known, EGT. I like that nickname. I think I came up with EGT actually.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was you because if you're just gonna say Earl Grey Trekkie, that's a bit of a bit of a mouthful.
That's true. And then I'm SFS, but folks sometimes call me SFB before or SB, but I don't like SS. It sounds too much like something bad. So we'll just stick with Starfleet Sohail, or Sohail's fine too. Audience, you can call me Sohail. You can call me Starfleet Sohail. You can even call me Starfleet Boy, which is what I used to be known as, but no longer am I a boy. So I've
That should
ditched
be
the
your
name
tagline.
Starfleet Sohail, no longer a boy. It's a good idea, actually. So, Robbie, we're here to talk about Strange New Worlds, season 2, episode 3, tomorrow, and 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 tomorrow.
And we're talking about that today.
And we're talking about that today. So, shall we go ahead and do a quick little episode summary, or do you want to jump? I did a good job yesterday, right? It was pretty short. It's like a
I could
minute.
wait. How about I try a summary and then you can
Oh.
top it?
Or how about you do the summary and then we'll go right into our discussion right after. You do it. Go, go, go. I like it when
Um,
others do
my
summaries.
summary is going to be ridiculously brief though, because I'm not
Okay,
good
go
at
ahead.
summaries.
That's
Um,
fine.
Laan turns up on the bridge. Well, no. First we see her turn up on the bridge, and she sees Pike, and then we see her go into the hallway, right? No.
Mm.
Uh,
Lon goes through her routine with like different people, Spock playing his lute too loud, all that
oh
stuff.
yeah,
And as she's walking through the hallway, she sees a time agent appear, or some weird man dressed in a
yeah.
suit appear, and he hands her this device, and then he disappears, and like a whooshy thing goes all over. And when she goes to the bridge, it's not Captain Pike. It's
But we see Captain Pike, don't we? I'm sure we see Captain Pike before we see Kirk, don't
you
we?
do not. You do
Not at
not.
all in this episode.
You do until the end.
Oh, it's Pike at the very end,
Yeah, she says you
and
can
he's
take
on the bridge.
like when she sees Pelia, and Pelia's like blah 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 blah. I didn't steal all this shit, and then La'an's like, "Oh, you could take that up with Captain Pike." And at the end of the episode, when she goes to the bridge, that's exactly what's happening. Is that Pelia is taking up the matter with Captain Pike, and Captain Pike then tells, yeah, and then La'an, who was at first kind of like whatever, but after having gone on that adventure, she's like, I think we should let this slip because she's got a soft spot for Pelia now.
Okay, right.
All right, so all right,
So
now
no.
you got the beginning. Okay, back to the summary.
Uh,
Go for it. Go for it. You're
so
doing a good job.
basically, La'an encounters a time agent. Time agent tells La'an something bad is going down in the past, so she conveniently gets to time travel
By the
to the
way, the
past.
time agent was shot,
Yeah,
so he was
shot. Big
actually
flash.
shot.
This kind of reminded me of 12 Monkeys, actually. You know, the first episode where we see Cole and he just comes out of like
Uh,
in a hallway. I don't know why. But
it does remind me a little bit about that. Yeah, it's true.
and then no, Cole encounters himself and he gives himself a mission. Anyway, so she goes into the past with Kirk, and Kirk and
They
La'an,
have to they go in the past because they have to change something back because something got changed, and they have to change it back for the present to be correct.
which already got me on a bad footing because how many times have we seen that? We just saw that in Picard season 3,
We
based
did, as a
on
matter of fact.
10 hours of that story. And I am sick of time travel in Star Trek. I really am at
Really?
this point. Um, I
I don't
like
know.
City on the Edge. I like the first part of Past Tense. The second episode isn't good, but the first episode's great. Second episode's really slow. Um, I like All Good Things, but that's not set on Earth.
It's
Um,
also not really time travel. Picard's traveling through time, but
yeah, so they do some interesting stuff with it, and it's kind of woven with the characters. But
Mhm.
the way it's been done in modern Trek has felt the most cheap to me and the most boring. Um, See
You
if it
mean the
was in the
whole
past on the Enterprise, I'd be totally up for it. I'd love it. Um, as you said about, Captain April, one of his previous adventures, or even a past adventure with Kirk, I'd be okay with it if it was on the ship. I just am sick of specifically past Earth stories because I find it boring.
Well, that was a great summary, except it
That
didn't
was
really
that
summarize.
was just going into my opinions, basically. That wasn't even a full summary, but yeah.
I was gonna say, can I just give a little bit more to your summary? Just a little
Yeah,
bit
yeah,
more.
absolutely.
So, 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 so what Robbie hates is when we go back to Earth in our modern times, and then it because it jumbles with everything. Anyways, Lon encounters that temporal agent, and then everything's different. There's no more United Federation of Planets. There's no more Starfleet, which we find out, which gets established pretty quickly in the episode. And you know, Earthlings seem to be very kind of xenophobic and unwilling to help, as we get in the scene with Spock. Anyways, La'an and Kirk are trying to figure out what to do about her situation. She insists that this is not the correct time period. He's like, whatever, lady, you're totally crazy. And he tries to grab her device away from her and accidentally presses the button. And they both get zapped to the 21st century in Toronto. And they're like trying to figure out by comparing notes, they're trying to figure out what might have changed, what's different. The only thing that stood out to La'an, but it didn't really stand out in a big way at first, is that Kirk has no idea about the notoriousness of her last name. In fact, he even says something like La'an Noonien Soong. So that's interesting that there's a Soong in his vocabulary there. But she's like, no, Noonien Singh, and he's like, no idea. So that's our little clue for the audience. Anyways, throughout the story, we start to get closer and closer to this moment that's supposed to happen, the crossroads, if you will. And what we discover the crossroads is that it's Khan. La'an was sent back in time, basically to preserve the timeline in which Khan is alive and does all his terrible things. So she sees him as a child, and it's kind of like one of those like "let's kill Hitler" thought problems or thoughts, thought things that people mull over. It's like if you had a time machine, you went back in the past, would you kill baby Hitler? Basically is
There's a
what
Doctor Who episode that's
"let's kill
notoriously
Hitler." Yeah,
bad about that, and
it's called
I find it's a
That's
lot more fun
different.
than
She
this
was gonna kill
episode.
River Song was gonna kill Hitler as an adult, which I'm
But it's
totally
campy and
okay.
it's fun
It
and it's
is. It
silly,
is campy and it's
whereas
fun.
this
It's true.
episode, for me, I
Yeah.
mean, surely you're a bit see maybe if we hadn't had already, it's kinda annoys me because it feels too artificial in the way previous Trek stuff just feels all crammed in to kinda satisfy the audience. Okay, no, it's not in the 90s. Look, there's your Khan lineage. Um, oh, look, you get some Kirk sprinkles on top. It feels too much like a writer has tried to just stuff fan service and appealing stuff, but then not really made a good story out of it for me. Um, I do feel like, I said I'm never gonna dig this Kirk, but I do feel like I enjoyed his performance a lot more in this episode. I enjoyed it actually. Um, uh, would you agree that, you know, Paul Wesley is improving as he goes on?
I've loved him from the beginning, so I don't know what you fools have been talking about this whole time where you're like, "Oh, I don't like him." But I'm just teasing. You're not a fool. But really quickly, just to add one more little thing to the summary that you that you don't want me to finish, is that this version of Kirk is very much like the Kirk that we know. Very different from the reception of the Kirk in the previous alternate reality episode where we saw Kirk. We seem to only see Kirk in alternate realities for now.
That's
Um,
a clever
yeah,
concept.
and this Kirk actually sacrifices himself. Well, actually, like it's kind of sad because he doesn't even bluff. He's not even bluffing. He's telling the truth. And this Romulan lady, who's a time agent, ends up killing him. Anyways, Lon ends up making the difficult decision of defending Khan. And that is what does it. The little button on the time device turns green. She can press it. She goes back. Everything's restored. She meets a time agent who from the Department of Temporal Affairs, who tells her that basically, she can't talk about this with anyone, but like, thank you for your service. You've restored things. So we can assume that everything's been set back to normal. Some interesting things about the episode that stood out to me, aside from I enjoyed the episode. I thought it was great. I thought that the two actors had wonderful chemistry together. I enjoyed the interpretation of I'll jump right into my opening thoughts. I enjoyed the interpretation of Kirk that Paul Wesley was delivering. I loved Pelia in this episode. I loved that they, again, it is very reminiscent. I'm not gonna, try to like play down that like, yeah, she's like Guinan, like how like Picard had to go see Guinan and stuff like that. I get it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's
But to
not just
me,
that
it's
though. It's it's not only riffing on Picard season 3. Picard season 3 was riffing on The Voyage Home, which this is also riffing upon, so it's like
yeah, but there
2
wasn't like
different.
there wasn't like a riff on the Voyage Home because with the
Yeah, you have
Voyage
the hot
Home,
dogs, it has a similar kind of vibe, it's just
the voyage home is like they have to go back in time to get whales, right? The Star Trek Picard is they have to go back in time and correct something that's been changed by Q.
and you had
And
the
Star
Isla line,
Yeah, but
it
like some might argue that this episode did. I'm not one of these people that are arguing it, but some might argue that this episode did the same thing Picard season 2 took a whole season to do in one episode. So kudos to this episode for that. But anyways, to finish my opening thoughts, Robbie, because I'll
sorry.
let you say all your things in just a second, is I really enjoyed Kirk and La'an's relationship. And I was trying to say that I really liked Pelia, despite the fact that it did resemble a kind of Guinan thing that was going on in Picard season 2. But I just love this character. Pelia is a really cool character, so she can almost do no wrong for me. But I just like the idea that at the end of the episode, wondering, does Pelia remember the events or not? Because it was before the fork in the road, so maybe she does. And there's all kinds of cool questions. But then the saddest part is La'an having to come to terms with the fact that the James T. Kirk that she knows is dead, and the one that's still around, has no idea who she really is. So, and that they had this whole relationship. So to me, the episode's a
Over
pretty
a day,
powerful.
over a day.
It was like several days,
What?
Robbie. And I knew a person legitimately who went on a date and asked. It was so good that he's dead now, but because he was old. But like back in the 40s or whatever, he went on a date with his then girlfriend, who he asked to marry that day.
That's
So you
so
never know sometimes.
ridiculous.
But also, Robbie, and I'm going to interrupt your opening thoughts, by the way, but also he, they're in an intense situation, so everything's heightened. I kind of like forgive the impulsiveness to that. Like she's kind of like, and they and he are kind of in a situation where like in a way you don't know what the outcome's going to be. It could be futile, and it's good that I think, La'an lets this is something that I've heard said a lot, and I agree with it, that La'an is in fact for the first time kind of being herself. When we talked about unmasking yesterday and being ourselves, and I think that's what happened in this episode, is that this adventure was about La'an just like embracing who she is and not hiding and like not having to like wear this burden of the con thing for once. And so that's maybe what helps her to open up more, and that's what accelerates their romance. So, all right, Robbie, you can give your opening thoughts now.
Um, um, you know, it's not the characters. It's not because it's a Kirk episode. In fact, I feel like the Kirk Laan stuff was pretty good. You know, it was really good, and I would have actually really enjoyed that kind of dynamic if it was. I would have preferred it if it was, you know, them on a mission together, which you couldn't really do because then it wouldn't be an alternate. Well, I suppose you could still do some kind of alternate.
Well, but they're
um,
on a mission together. They
No,
just
like a
didn't.
mission in space,
Gotcha,
on
gotcha.
a ship, you know, I would really dig that. I think it's just the fact that it was tied together so many pieces, it doesn't work for me, you know. In Picard season 3, there was so much previous stuff, but it felt elegantly woven in. Whereas for this episode, it felt like this needs to happen, this needs to be
Let's
explained, and it
let's
all was
both
kind
try not to compare this show to Picard or any other show. I know we both have been doing it, but let's just try to stick to one of our audience members hates it when we pit Star Trek against Star Trek, and they're a good audience members. So for their
right.
sake, let's try not to sake to pit the series together. Let's just talk about this show.
Um, well, I feel like, and I can't even blame Akiva Goldsman because he didn't write this episode. I don't know who wrote this episode, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't him. But it was probably his notes that were you know, passed on. It just feels kind of weird to me that the showrunner of Picard season 3 would write an episode that's incredibly, or would give the notes for an episode that's incredibly similar, Picard season 2, that's incredibly similar not long after Picard season 2, because Strange New World season 2,
It's
that must have been written not long after, right? Similar kind of time.
But Robbie, how is it really similar? I mean, it is similar in the mechanics and in the way the time stuff works, but like really it's just an adventure of two people, whereas Picard's on a bigger scale. And like, yeah, I think they definitely stole the time travel fork in the road, correct the past idea. But
Mhm.
like even Picard season 2 was stealing that from Back to the Future and from like, so it's nothing. You're absolutely right when you say it's nothing new, but I do think that this episode does it in a new way.
You know, it's not even a critique of a writer. See, even if this was done by my favorite writer, I don't even know who that is in Star Trek, but um, I think I'd still just not like it, even if it was
I think
an
my favorite
amazing
writer might be
episode. Even
of
if it was,
current Star Trek, Aaron Walke, because he wrote several of my favorite episodes of Star Trek Prodigy, which are like really big all-time episodes for me.
well, even if it was done by Aaron Walke, I don't think I'd like it. I think, you know, I think I'm just sick of Air from the Past. It feels cheap to me on budget scale. It feels boring. It's not what I watch Star Trek for. Um, and I would never, I actually never want to see another Air from the Past episode. That's just me.
You're setting yourself up for a big disappointment because
I don't think
that's
so.
definitely going to happen again at
Unless it's a
some point
really,
in
really
Star Trek.
amazing episode that will somehow win me over, I'll stand by those words. No matter what writer, you know, I just think I'm sick of it.
Well, okay, so obviously you're gonna have trouble finding something good in this episode. So,
Well,
uh,
no, I really like the performances. I thought they were great.
okay, all
I
right.
like
Well,
the idea to put these characters together. It would have been very easy to somehow do some alternate timeline Spock and Kirk thing, which, oh, I sense that you're a great captain, you know, where they're kind of, you get like,
there was a hint of alternate Spock.
well, that
We
was not
find out,
Kirk though, you know, that would have been very easy fan service.
but
Oh,
it was
look,
really.
it's Kirk and Spock, but not the way you know them.
Do you
Um,
think it was interesting though that in this episode when La'an gets on the bridge of the Enterprise and sees Kirk there, that the interaction that he's having is with Spock, who is the captain of his own ship, and they're desperate, they need help, and the Enterprise denies the help, which is like, that to me was like, oh yeah, this is a messed up timeline, because that would never happen in the correct timeline.
that was my favorite part of the episode because during that scene, I thought this is brilliant. You know, the whole opening scene, we see Spock, we see the time agent, we see Kirk on the bridge. I thought, wow, I'm gonna absolutely love this episode because it's gonna be an alternate timeline episode on the Enterprise with Kirk. This is really interesting. I love these episodes, kind of like Equality of Mercy, the finale, which was
Great
fantastic.
Enterprise being the biggest, like, kind of one that I can think of where it's a different Enterprise, a different reality, and stuff like that as well.
Because I dig those episodes. It's just
A character that's saying time is wrong, which again, that's kinda like how it was on yesterday's Enterprise, but I thought that was interesting that it felt like a callback to that more than a
mm,
rip-off, you know?
'cause no, I'm not saying a rip off. I'm just saying, um, we've not really had that in Strange New Worlds, actually, have we? I mean, well, we
Yeah,
technically
we
did
did
this
in
episode.
The
Well,
Balance of
Quality of
Mercy
Mercy,
episode,
yeah,
Quality
but
of
that was
Mercy,
already a revisit of an older episode.
right.
So I thought this is gonna be, an alternate timeline episode that's completely fresh, but it's still taking on old stuff because Star Trek
So
has done
so let me
alternate
ask you,
timeline stuff.
like, so what's not fresh about we've never been to Toronto in Star Trek. We have never really delved into the what made Khan what Khan is. There's a lot of interesting things that they show that, like, I think are really relevant, in terms of Star Trek, you know, kind of showing us, like, something that resembles our reality to teach us kind of a lesson. And I guess we were talking about, genetic manipulation. It's interesting, by the way, that the last episode, I hadn't thought about this, but the last episode was about the Illyrians and, genetic manipulation. And now we're in this episode, we're going into the past and seeing why humans became, the event that made humans, so leery about genetic manipulations, that they would create like this insane kind of, like, aversion to it. um and it was interesting because, I think that what this episode is saying is that without Khan, there is no Federation. The time agent even says something like, "Oh, this event was supposed to happen in '92," which is what they say in Star Trek: The Original Series. But because of all the temporal shenanigans, she's had to wait now 30 years to get to Khan. So, like, his, I think of the thing of, like, I think of the line Thanos says, like, "I am inevitable." Khan is an inevitability. He's inevitable in the Star Trek universe. And I think this is an episode that interestingly, put that into play.
I think it's just personal preference because I don't actually, apart from the Wrath of Khan, I'm not that interested in Khan, and I think even in that film, he's not, the most interesting villain. It's mostly the performance and the dialogue, but you look at him on paper, he's not really that interesting. But that doesn't matter because he's theatrical, he's entertaining, you know, he's got a fantastic performance. Mostly the film is about Kirk and Spock, you know, and mostly it's about how our characters react to that situation. So any stuff that's brought up about Khan, you know, just
Yeah, but Khan
just
really plays
and
a small part in this, even
mm,
though the implications of Khan are huge. I guess he's not a really big part of the episode. It's about La'an and Kirk, really, if you think about it.
well, yeah, but that's just one thing that just I completely turned off to
What
because I
would you, if you could have, since we're not really finding your interest here, I'm curious, what would have been a better scenario? Like, if you could tweak this episode, change something, around to make it a
well, I
better
just said it
episode,
would
like,
be an alternate timeline on the Enterprise. I'd love
right?
that.
Oh yeah.
Love
So,
that.
like, but
It
like,
would be
if you,
Kirk on
but
the Enterprise,
there's
like an
no
OTOS
scenario
episode. That would be
There's no
amazing.
scenario where you could see it working, where you go back to Toronto, like,
No, no.
nothing at all. Wow, that's crazy. Because, like, again, you were just talking about Edith Keeler. That's what this is. It's kind of like it's kind of almost like a retelling of City on the Edge of Forever, because in a way, Captain Kirk must die. Like, Edith Keeler must die, Captain Kirk of this timeline, like La'an had these like grand notions. She's like, the device protected me. Maybe it could protect you too and bring you back into the prime timeline, and there would be two of you, but you'd be you that's happened before. That's not a problem in the Federation. We have Thomas Riker and like other duplicates, but um so yeah, like I feel like there was no way out of it. Like Kirk would have either been erased from time once things were reset, or like he died. So he died either way. So there was no way. It's kind of tragic, I think, and I think that's like I keep trying to like give you nuggets to hopefully like change your mind on this episode, but really I don't care if you change your mind. You're entitled to your opinion and everything like that, but I'm just surprised that none of that affects you.
It's kind of difficult because City on the Edge, on paper, I shouldn't like it, because I'm not a huge fan of romance in Star Trek. I like romance outside of Star Trek, but inside of Star Trek, I'm not a huge fan. I
Well,
feel like
Star
the
Trek
stuff
doesn't have
with
a good it doesn't have a good track record, right?
yeah, yeah, the
Yeah,
stuff
with
with
romance.
T'Pol and Trip is
For
so, uh, just ridiculous and cheesy. The only relationship I like is, well,
I think Culber and Stamets are pretty good, yeah?
um, I don't feel the same way about them as I do with Kira and Dodo, but that's
Oh, yeah.
also
What
personal
about
because
Cisco and Cassidy?
yeah, well, even that relationship was not in a whole
Well,
lot of
not
episodes.
okay.
And
That's true.
even the Kira Odo one was mostly focused on Odo, which is one of my gripes about it.
Right, but those are like again, those are the ones that are good are really developed relationships, minus
That's
the
what
Trip
makes
and
City on the
Paul, yeah.
Edge unique because it's one episode where you actually get the feeling of a relationship, an entertaining relationship in one episode, more so than, uh, Trip and T'Pol, in what, 2 seasons?
See, that's what I feel like this episode did for Lon and Kirk. To me, it felt like a really plausible thing. Like I actually enjoyed it. I was very happy for Lon. Kirk he snogs a lot of ladies. We know that in the line of duty mostly, but you know he does it. So that could have been a thing, but no, in this case it felt really genuine on both their parts, and I wonder now if they do meet in the prime timeline, what we might expect from them.
I now want the finale of this show to be a TOS episode. Not like a TOS episode script, but just an unaired TOS episode with Paul Wesley as Kirk, Uhura, you have someone play, you know, McCoy, Scotty. How ridiculous would that be?
So one of the things you said earlier was that you actually enjoyed Paul Wesley as Captain Kirk more in this episode.
Mhm.
What was different this time?
Um, seeing that, well, seeing in the season one finale, um, I didn't get a lot of energy from him. I didn't get a lot of charisma. He f I think Favre put it, he said he felt like he could be any guest star, any captain of the week. Not a bad guest star, but definitely not fitting of Kirk. Um, he just felt like another captain, and maybe he wouldn't feel that way if we didn't have Anson Mount, who just shines off the screen with his effortless charisma that I think Anson Mount naturally has, and he just brings that, even more to the screen. So you literally have an episode that's Pike heavy, and so you're literally facing off him on the screen. You have Pike and Kirk together, um, and the episode is downplaying Pike's abilities, but in the same episode, Pike is a lot more entertaining as an actor for me. And so I just thought, not only am I not into Kirk because we already have a whole load of Kirk who's widely cemented into the canon, so I do not want to see much of him. I want to see strange new stuff. I want to see Pike. I want to see these characters. So that just I was already put off, and then just to see that I didn't like his performance, and we only got it just felt too fan servicey as well for me. I just didn't like it. But in this episode, we didn't have Pike really facing off with him. It was Laan, and it was a smaller story, um, and he had more time to kind of to for me to kind of um warm up to him. More range to show in this episode, and a bit of love. So he
Was
had
there anything in
maturity.
particular that you were looking for in the previous thing that who's your favorite Kirk of the 3 Kirks, by the way, that we've had? Like,
Um, it's probably Shatner in the films,
yeah, is supreme
specifically
Kirk.
in the films, though.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he's great in the show, but yeah, he's something else on the big screen. It's true. I agree with that. I think I feel the same way that the film version of Captain Kirk is definitely like the gold standard for that character. Um, but then you definitely don't want to see someone trying to mimic that. But what I always liked about Chris Pine's uh, performance in the Star Trek Kelvin universe films is that without doing it, and I just realized Chris Pine is just like that. He has a similar way and mannerism, and just like the way he's got that same kind of presence that William Shatner does, not quite as like strong as William Shatner's, you know,
He's definitely
quirks or whatever.
charismatic, though.
But yeah, they both have a charisma, and Chris Pine has his own brand of charisma, but there's just a way that when he's like doing Kirk on screen that I just think it's the same character. Like there's nothing like that for me. And what I while I think Paul Wesley is a departure from both of those, I didn't have a problem with it because I knew in the first episode that we see him in that it was an alternate reality, so that Kirk had different experiences, so I was okay with like a completely different take
Mhm.
on Kirk. And I wouldn't say that Paul Wesley's take was completely different, but it was just not close to it was not close enough to the William Shatner film version of Kirk that we're all, kind of like
Well, he
familiar with,
wouldn't,
if you
be
will.
like that anyway because he'd be going more for TOS Kirk, right?
Right, but there wasn't like, there wasn't that kind of like panache or whatever, that
Yeah.
extra thing or whatever, that the twinkle, if you will, if or whatever you want to call it. That way he has of smiling. In this episode, though, I definitely agree that there's a lot more callbacks to the character. Like one of the things that I really enjoyed was Paul Wesley really tuned into the idea. There's a line about Kirk being a pile of books and legs, right? Like from Gary Mitchell in the original series, which I really loved. I've always loved that because I do think that that's an interesting thing, that like this bad boy of the cosmos was once like one of the nerdiest kind of like, bookish kind of people. And so I love that in this episode, he's definitely a captain. You definitely get the sense that he's like a leader and that he's, always looking to be in command of the situation. He's always he's thinking, a few steps ahead and everything like that. But what I really liked is that uh, the references, without even being like obvious references to things that are very Kirk like for example, when he does the chess to get money. And I love that line about like, oh yeah, that two-dimensional chess, it's like nothing, it's no big deal. It's like almost an idiot's chess compared to three-dimensional chess, which he's
That
really
was
good
just
at
pure
also, by the
referencing
way.
for me. That was just
That's an essential part of Kirk's character, especially in the original series. He's always playing chess with Spock. Like
yeah,
he
but
enjoys strategy. He's like a strategist. He's like so to me, that reference, as you will, or like fan service or whatever you want to call it, to me, that like was totally a way to enhance the idea of like, oh, this is Captain Kirk. The other scene was when he's looking off into the sunset, and he's, in he grew up in space. This Kirk was born on the starship Iowa instead of on Earth, and this Kirk's Earth is scorched. You can't even see the sky or whatever. It's like, a sad place compared to what the prime timeline Captain Kirk grew up with. And I just love that there's a lot going on in that scene. But one of the things that I loved, which isn't like an obvious hit you over the head, but like, that line that he says, all I ask is a tall ship and a star to steer her by, in Star Trek 5, I think it is. there's a tall ship and our sun in the distance, which is the star. And I just like was like, oh, that's really cool and clever. And there's just like
Cheese,
all kinds
cheese,
of
cheese.
oh
It's
wow,
you know
Robbie.
what you know the problem for me?
You're
This
too
show
young to be so killjoy. I'm
no,
just
it's just
kidding.
I feel like
Such a
it's
killjoy.
more interesting if you're gonna show an alternate version of Kirk, alternate timeline, then don't bring out all the stuff that could this basically was just Kirk, you know?
But he
If you
is. That's what I love is that like this man, this personality, even with all this hardship, has managed to come out the same person, like the same good, noble character has managed.
but
So you
surely
just,
we want to see, new avenues to the character, like we saw with Picard in Tapestry. If you're exploring his origins, if you just
but
have
these
all the
aren't really.
references of
We're
future
not
stuff,
really exploring like Kirk at the Academy
then what's
here,
the point in
though.
even having him here? Not the Academy, but if you're not exploring a new side to Kirk, what's the
But you
point
are
in actually
you're
having him?
exploring the new
Because
okay,
you're adding to the
I'm gonna
canon if
stop
we
you for a
see a
second and
different
say,
side to
we're
him.
exploring a new side of Kirk, just not the side that you wanted
No,
necessarily.
it's just old references and stuff. That's not really a new side to me, like, I'd
I
be
felt like this was, like, an interesting
seeing with the
dimension.
Kobayashi Maru, would how cool would that be? That'd be new. That would
No,
be
that's not
a tie to the
new. Like,
past,
we've
but it
seen
would
that we saw it in Star Trek, 2009. We saw it in the movie.
that's an alternate timeline, though, that
It
doesn't
so
count.
is this, so we wouldn't have I wouldn't have, like, wanted to see it this
That
way.
would be him in command, though, that would be
He's
interesting.
in command of the situation. Well, he's not quite in command. They're sharing command,
Just
La'an
sharing
and Picard.
hot dogs and playing chess, that's not the same.
That's another sweet scene, but I like that Kirk is eating he eats poutine later on. Have you ever had poutine?
No, I don't know
French
what that
fries
is.
and, well, they're called chips, right? In
Oh, yeah, I've had chips
Scotland, yeah.
before.
But chips with gravy and cheese on top,
Ugh,
have you had that?
no, I don't want to ever have that.
I've
Is
got
it
you in
gravy
such a
cold?
I've got you in such a contrary mood today. That's funny. What's that?
Is the gravy supposed to be cold?
No, it's warm gravy.
Okay, that's
The
good.
whole thing's warm. The whole dish is by the way, poutine or is it poutine or poutine? I can't remember how people say it, but that is the national dish of
Sounds
Canada.
fancy for such a kind of chips and gravy, it's poutine.
Well, it's a French word, I guess.
Oh, okay,
Poutine.
that makes
I don't know
sense.
what it means. I know that pasta puttanesca is pasta of the horrors.
Now you're just showing off.
Have you ever had a pasta puttanesca, by the way?
No?
It's really well. There's like no one set recipe. The whole point of pasta puttanesca is that you're supposed to just like put together whatever you have in the fridge into your pasta. Like it doesn't have like a set recipe. So I often will make it a sauceless pasta with like butter and olive oil, and then I'll put in fresh olives, shallots. What else do I put in my puttanesca? Maybe some herbs, things like that. Tomatoes, fresh tomatoes, cherry tomatoes, sliced in half. Anyways, back to the episode. so, okay. The other big thing for me in this episode is that I think again, as far as time travel episodes go, well, let's talk a little bit about the character, the Romulan undercover temporal agent. What did you think about her?
Um, I love the Romulans, and I feel like they got kind of I feel like they were kind of boring in TNG, for the most part, except for maybe the Defector. Mostly we
Yeah,
saw
it's a
them
great
as,
episode. Yeah.
um, these bad wigged view screen enemies that are always the same, which is a lot
Yeah.
of Star Trek, species, but I think we went into the Vulcans more and Klingon kind of
Well, Next Generation had
stuff
like
more.
Romulans a lot, but they hardly did anything. DS9 did more with Romulans, right? I feel like.
They were never really fleshed out,
Mhm.
like the Klingons on DS9. So the
Right.
Romulans were very I feel like they're one of the more two-dimensional, um, species in Trek. So it was cool to see them come back in a quality of mercy, and funnily enough, they had a kind of TNG the what was her name? The
Denatra?
Praetor.
Oh, Praetor, yeah, yeah.
She had a very
Tila.
TNG vibe, but it was really cool to see the Romulans, in their ship, just like in Balance of Terror, but it was all new. It wasn't just like flat background view screen. It was interesting, and the performances were, I'd say, personally, a lot more interesting than we saw sometimes in TNG. It was very stage play, like very theatrical.
So, like, you like this Romulan character, or
No,
you just thought she was kinda oh, okay.
because she was basically she didn't feel Romulan because she looked human and she played as though she was like a human time agent again, you know,
Mm.
and it felt too fan servicey to have like a time agent. It was just I didn't find it very interesting.
The thing I thought that was interesting is that, like, the show for me, one of the cool things about this episode is that I think you had to do this before, but I think this episode kinda, like, puts it out there in world, is that, like, the timeline is always changing. Like, there's always things going on, and that's why we have, like, these counter agency because the Romulans are messing with time travel, which, by the way, I'm curious when they're messing with time travel, because the warbird that we see is a TOS era warbird that she had a picture of. Maybe it's her warbird. I don't know. Maybe she arrived on it. But regardless, the Romulans are messing with time. We know the Klingons are messing with time. So it makes sense that there's a temporal kind of agency. And of course, Enterprise had the whole temporal Cold War and things like that. So I think this was a cool episode because Enterprise kind of threw out all this like temporal stuff that like didn't affect anything else that came after, right?
They didn't
And I
know
always
what
thought
to
that
do with
was
it though. That's kind of
right,
what,
right, and they didn't
and it
even
was
get to
boring in
finish.
Enterprise as well.
Yeah,
Actually, I forgot about the time travel episodes in
yeah,
Enterprise. They were terrible as well. So maybe
but
that's why I'm sick
but
of it.
but like what I thought was interesting is that like this kind of like was a continuation of that idea, like with Daniels and the temporal Cold War and everything like that. We saw it that it's still going on, but it forces us. I think that the most impactful thing about this episode from a Star Trek enthusiast perspective is that it forces us to consider another dimension when we're talking about canon, because up until now people have had this problem where like they can't resolve the visual continuity with the general overall continuity. Most people don't have a problem with the events in Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Strange New Worlds. They don't think it like necessarily infringes upon canon, but they do have a problem with the visualization. Everyone's like, how are they going to make it look like TOS? How are they going to do this? Like all this, like it's a difficult thing for people to resolve, especially when there's other franchises like Star Wars, which are almost perfect in the way that they have a linear, like a continuity, a visual continuity throughout the show as well. So whether a show set when a show's set in the past, like you can clearly tell how this turns into, visually speaking, like technology, everything turns into what we see uh in later installments. So in later installments in the timeline, I should say, right? So where Star Trek kind of broke canon, if you will, was like when Discovery came on the scene and it was set in the 23rd century in Kirk and Spock's time.
Well,
It
even the motion picture, they were doing that. I mean, come
But
on,
this is
you
going
know?
forward. It's different when you're going forward because time, that's just like, oh, technology
Yeah, I
got
suppose.
better or whatever. But when you go back in the past, you're supposed to, the general idea is that to treat prequels like period films.
But
If
even
there's already,
Enterprise had problems as well, you know,
I agree. I think
I
Enterprise,
feel like
I
the
agree
Enterprise looked
completely.
more
Yeah.
advanced in,
I,
Enterprise than
then,
in TOS, you
then
know?
TOS, I completely agree. So that's why I was one of the people that
Although
definitely,
Discovery was too much for me. Like, I feel like the Strange New Worlds, I'm cool with that, but Discovery, if you were telling me that was in TOS, that just looks too much like it's where it is now, you know?
well,
Uh,
Discovery and Strange New Worlds to me are equal footing in terms of that. I mean, they've done some, even the Klingons having the ridges to me is not correct for this time period in TOS. We don't see ridged Klingons throughout TOS. The Gorn are a huge thing. Anyways, these are all things that people have problems with, but this episode to me is the keystone to resolving, at least for me, it resolves everything, because on screen we have the Romulans saying that events are changing constantly, and we see it too, because we know Khan was supposed to happen in 1992, and now he's born later, and the whole thing's been pushed back and everything like that. We've even seen different references to the Khan event in Star Trek Picard. So like that timeline is constantly, that this time period is constantly, it's like a big heavy time period, so it's constantly in flux. So now I can feel a little bit better. Like I'm thinking now, like, oh yeah, like we have to, I don't mind the visual continuity being different anymore. Like to me it's totally fine if the last episode of Strange New Worlds just ends without explanation, everything looks like the original series. To me that would be totally fine because of this episode
Or
and
even
the
if it doesn't,
implications. Right,
it's
even if it doesn't, it's
yeah.
fine. But the implications of this episode to me are far reaching, and so now I've kind of invented this thing called 3D canon. I call it 3D canon, three-dimensional canon, to kind of riff off of Kirk, being like, oh yeah, two-dimensional, whatever. So that's what I from now on, that's how I resolve the visual continuity. And that explains Enterprise to me, because the Borg, it all started, I think the biggest infraction was destroying the Borg sphere over Earth in the past. And Enterprise actually addresses it by showing that the Borg technology was there on Earth, on the poles.
That was another
Um,
bad time travel episode.
Granted, but between that episode and this episode, there's like irrefutable evidence that time shenanigans are taking place, and that we have to consider them in Star Trek. That you can't ignore them as part of canon, and time shenanigans, you can no longer ignore that as part of the Star Trek canon. So that's why I like the whole thing there. What do you think?
For me, I'm totally fine with this Enterprise imagining it as a TOS one. I don't really mind that because I feel like in season 4 of Enterprise where they were you have to put respect to them. They basically, I think they used the original series set tour for those 2 mirror episodes.
Yeah.
And it didn't work for me because it just looked too goofy and too bright when you're comparing it to the stark submarine gray NX, and then they're supposed to, our NX characters are like, wow, this is so advanced, and it's got jelly bean buttons and stuff, and it's like, wait, but this doesn't look more advanced than NX. It's kind of funny when you think about that. Um, when they're on this Enterprise, it looks kind of more like a play set in comparison, and that's just because of the time. But all I want is for I'm even okay with the Gorn. They don't need to even do anything different with the Gorn. I don't love the Gorn stories they're doing, but I can headcanon that this is like maybe the Gorn come from multiple planets, or there's a
Which
this
I'm sure we're gonna
section.
find out something like that. I'm sure there's gonna be some kind of explanation like that. That's the other thing, is I trust these writers. Like a lot of people are really worried what they're gonna do, but I trust the writers. I have a good feeling about how they're gonna, the direction they're gonna take the story in, and I think they are gonna be respectful to continuity.
There's only one character. Every other character I can see as their future selves. Pike, Spock, Uhura, M'Benga. The only character that I don't quite see the evolution is Chapel. But I feel like as long as by the end of this show, she has some kind of, not necessarily a heartbreak, because I suppose that would be cliche, but some reason why she's so stark in TOS. She can be this kind of spicy, energetic character all the way up until the last episode for me. But there has to be some reason why she
I
changes.
think we're gonna get all that, or it's gonna. I'm
Everything else
not
is
worried about
perfect,
any of that. I'm. That's the thing, is like I'm kind of living in the moment of this show. I'm not too concerned about how it's gonna end at this point. I'm kind of like just like, oh, let's go along for the ride. Uh, as we're running out of look at that, you didn't think we'd have enough to talk about, and like we're almost running out of an hour. But as we're running out of time, I just want to address Khan for a second. What did you think of that scene, and what did you think of the performance and all that stuff?
Um,
I just want to like before you comment, I guess I'll just point out that one of the things that I didn't notice the first time around watching it, but that I noticed later when I watched it on a bigger screen, is that there's like green blood on his face, like that she's wiping off. Like it's a harrow. Well, to me, it's a harrowing kind of situation, and a pretty like creepy kind of like weird intense scene. But anyways, I thought it was monumental in a way. But
I think as the episode went on, I just was less interested. You know, the first 10 minutes, brilliant. Alternate timeline on the
so when
Enterprise.
you got to the con part and you saw that it was him, you were just like, "Oh, whatever."
Yeah, I'd kind of checked out by that point. And you know, we had a new episode come out. Well, I'm sorry for spoiling what time this has been recorded at. That's because of me, audience.
That's fine,
But
that's fine.
um, I feel like the new episode, among the Lotus Eaters, was another fantastic episode. You know, for the most part, I just love this show.
It's
This
a
is the
shame
only
I'm not gonna
episode.
be talking about it with you, I'll be talking it with another guest,
Yeah, that is unfortunate.
but it's okay,
um,
we'll get a little Robbie recap of it, you know,
um, but I hope, and I feel like this is probably the only episode that I will dislike this season. Um, I don't even have any idea what the next episode is going to be. So,
after Among the Lotus Eaters.
yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember what the title of it is, but they gave a little teaser of it on the Ready Room today. So, well,
Oh, I
anyways, we
didn't
won't
mind that. Yeah.
we won't go into it in detail. Anyways, I guess wow, so like two totally opposing opinions. I did not sway you. You did not sway me. We kept to
It's
our
nice though.
guns
That's
on this
good.
one. That is good. It's good. It's nice to have friendly discussions and disagreements and stuff like that. So I guess we'll go into our closing thoughts, and if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and go first, and we'll let you close out the show with your closing thoughts. But you know, on the heels of the previous episode, which I, uh, again think it's like a monumental, timeless episode, Ad Astra per Aspera. Um, Per aspera, per aspera. I can never say it. Anyways, on the heels of that, we get another kind of like heavy hitter episode. And I think the two of them back to back say interesting things about, humanity and stuff like that. But I think that for me, the most interesting thing about this episode was definitely you know, uh, we talk a lot about seeing more depth to these characters. And then, so I think for me, the most interesting thing about this episode was getting to see La'an let loose and be more, more herself, unguarded, I guess that's the word I'd been looking for all night. To see La'an unguarded and like just kind of like, you know, it was charming. I love her. I already liked her character a lot, but I really like her as a romantic person, like as a person who's not afraid to love and who's willing to laugh. And there was a difference. I don't know in Christina Chong's performance of Lon is very like much like Malcolm Reed. I like to think of her as very like stiff upper lip.
Yeah, they would get on pretty
They
well,
would get
wouldn't
on
they?
so well. She might even have been he might have been even her professor or something at the academy or a mentor at some point. You never know. Like there's all kinds of ways that that could happen. We don't have to have that happen, but I'm just saying like they're very similar
Just
kinds of
her, Reed and Bashir. Although Bashir's more jovial, I suppose.
yeah, but Bashir's late, much like he's not even born yet. Um but Bashir's kind of goofy too. I think
Yeah.
Reed's always just kind of very like, straight laced or whatever. Although I think he has some really good tension with that Mako officer. But anyways, going back to that, I think that like to me that was one of the best things was seeing her character kind of like open up. And, just in general, I think for me, this episode was just fun, actually. Like, I really enjoyed the chemistry between the two characters. I was laughing a lot. And again, throwing Pelia into the mix, who I already love and everything. So, this is another episode that gets like a high mark for me. I think I'm going to give this episode a 9.5 just because a little bit of what you said did seep in. And I do kind of see what you're saying. But overall, I think it's a very powerful and strong episode.
You know, it would probably have been easy to have Chapel be in Leanne's place, to have some kind of love triangle nonsense where she remembers the stuff with Kirk and interferes with her stuff with Spock, and then Roger Corby comes in, and uh,
That's a crazy episode. You're
yeah,
talking
yeah.
about in one episode. It's like a
No,
nuts
well,
out.
Roger Corby would come in later, but she'd remember the stuff with Kirk. Um, so I'm glad that they have put the Chapel love stuff in the background.
Some folks were saying that like this would have been a great opportunity to have Laan and maybe Chapel, or maybe Laan and Una time travel, but I really like that we got this glimpse into another Kirk, and he's such an iconic character. And I would say that like Star Trek kind of will always reference Kirk in some ways. He's the gold standard first captain, of the Enterprise that we've met. So I think that there's always going to be like a desire, I think, from fans to see more of Kirk.
Eventually, we'll be through so many different actors that have played Kirk. No, I'm just
It's
kidding.
like Shakespeare, though, in a way. Like how many actors have played Hamlet,
But
or whatever.
Shakespeare must move on eventually, you know.
Yeah, I guess, or it could live forever, which I think Kirk will.
It will live
so what?
forever, but yeah. Yeah.
So what are your closing thoughts, and if you would give us a rating?
Um, I reserve my 1 out of 10s to just offensive episodes, the worst episodes like Code of Honor.
Yeah,
Um, so I'd
0
probably
actually.
give
That
it
one.
2 because
Wow.
I'm never gonna watch it again, that's just me.
You're like, yeah, I just saw this episode on. I get it. I know what that
But
feels like.
I
So
don't
yeah,
have
I
any
understand.
kinda although I've said all this stuff, I'm not, like, mad at it or anything, I
Not your
just
cup of
didn't vibe with me.
wasn't your cup of Raktajino. That's all. Yeah, makes sense. Well, that was fun. It was really fun talking to you about this episode. I can't believe how quickly an hour went by, and we just
I feel like
like.
we went quicker in this one than the last one, but I enjoyed the
Well,
last one
yeah,
more. It's funny, you know?
I've the one yesterday's episode was only an hour and 4 minutes, so it's not much long, and we're probably gonna do an hour
We
and
had a
four
more
minutes.
interesting discussion here, I feel like, it's funny.
I think that yeah, well, I think the discussion was interesting for me. A lot of what I think needs to be said about this episode has been said by so many others, on our friends over on Text Track, over at Trek Central. We talked about this episode. No, I didn't talk about this episode. I missed this one. But just in general, there's been a lot of conversation about it. So we're coming to the table a little late. So that's why I'm glad we didn't talk about all the same stuff everyone else talked about. We did touch on it, but I think it was interesting that we also had our own kind of views on it. And yeah, it was fun to try to convince you to give it
I really
a
like the
better score.
conversation about canon as well. That was interesting.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's a tough sell. A lot of people are not buying my idea. People are like, ah, 3D canon, whatever, doesn't
Some people
count.
are just flat earthers.
Flat cannoners. Oh my god, I'm gonna use that. That's a great one. You're a flat canonista. That's really good. Um, Robbie, have you got anything that you'd like to promote or talk about, or is there any? And where can folks find you if they should choose to?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Earl Grey Trekkie. Um, yeah, and that's about it for now.
You can find me on Twitter as Starfleet Boy. It's the only place I'm still Starfleet Boy. Everywhere else, you can find me as Starfleet So Hail. And now I've joined Blue Sky as well as Threads. So I'm on all the social medias, TikTok, everywhere you can think about. But
In all the
uh,
universes.
all the alternate versions of Starfleet Sohail. But yeah, you could. Our main content is here on YouTube. We're also starting to catch up on our podcast. Our podcast feed's way behind, but I'm starting to upload episodes, so hopefully we'll get caught up and be current by the end of the year. But Robbie, it's been a pleasure as always hanging out with you. I can't wait to talk to you about future episodes. And audience, thank you for joining us. Yesterday we saw Jill in our fake version of the audience, and Joel and Virginia. I want to say hi to Shishan Girl as well, or sorry, Cake is Eternal. I also want to say hi to Chris and like a whole bunch, just all the people who come by. You guys are all so wonderful. So thank you for supporting us. It would really help us out if you would hit the like button. Smash the like button, as a matter of fact. If you're not subscribed and you enjoyed this discussion or any of or others, please consider subscribing. That would help us out too. And live long and prosper. And we will see you next